Imagine you're walking along the side of Route 40 late at night. Cars pass every few seconds, their headlights disappearing into the darkness ahead. Then one finally slows down. A man pulls over and offers you a ride. He seems normal enough, and you still have a very long way to go. So you get in, at first nothing feels wrong, until he passes where you told him you need to go. Maybe you ask where he's taking you. Maybe that's when you notice the doors are locked too. But either way, you realize you've made a horrible mistake, because the man behind the wheel isn't taking you home, and no one knows you're in his car. I'm Gabby D.
This is Ty.
And this is the case of Delaware's only serial killer, Steven Pennell. Welcome back, Ty. I'm so glad we didn't scare you away with the Ted Bundy series.
No. No, it was fun.
Anything new? Do you want to make the announcement? We bought a fucking house. What do you mean of? We bought a house.
Yeah, we bought a house.
This will be a very special episode because we have a very special guest here on Beyond the Bone Saw. And I waited specifically until we moved to do this episode because we're going to talk about Delaware's only serial killer. Have you heard about him?
No.
Okay, we're going to dig deep, and our apartment where we just lived, a lot of the activity was around there, and you grew up there and were born there, so I think this is going to hit really close to home for you.
Yeah,
I think it's going to surprise you. So before anyone in Delaware had ever heard the name Steven Pennell, before newspapers were writing about serial killers stalking women along Route 40, there was Shirley Ellis. Shirley Ellis was 23 years old, and this took place November 1987, so we're going a little far back in the time machine. And this is actually when her body would be found. Depending on where you read about her, you're going to find Shirley described almost immediately as a sex worker, but of course, she was much, much more than that. And it was confirmed that she was a sex worker, but she actually was moving on from her past, and her family would say there was much more to her than her line of work. Shirley was actually trying to move away from sex work. She just stopped doing it altogether. Also, she could chase her dreams of becoming a nurse, and she was actually taking classes to reach that goal at the time of her death. On November 29th, 1987, Shirley had spent part of her day at Wilmington Hospital. She wasn't working or studying. She actually had walked there to give one of her friends, a dying AIDS patient at the time, a Thanksgiving platter of food. So she was walking from Newark to Wilmington Hospital. Around November, it's a little chilly now, Walking.
Holy shit.
All to give someone a plate of Thanksgiving food. So that says a lot about her right there. Now, this was also during the AIDS epidemic when even nurses were terrified to go near AIDS patients. So that also says a lot about her. Now, it was about 6 p.m. that she started her hike there. So we can assume it's super cold. And on top of it, it was almost a 15-mile hike. So she was walking 15 miles there. At some time that evening, Shirley left the hospital. She finished giving the food away, and she needed a way home. Again, it's 1987. There's no cell phones, no Uber, no app where you can just pull out your phone and have a car waiting for you in a few minutes. So she did what most people during that time did. She started her journey home and hoped a car would stop to pick her up along the way.
They didn't have bus routes? I'm sure they have bus routes.
Well, that costs money. Hitchhiking back then, it was more common than it is today. Shirley made her way along Route 40 looking for someone willing to give her a ride, and somewhere along that trip, she got into a vehicle, but she never made it home. So a young couple trying to find a makeout spot along Old Baltimore Pike Industrial Park, which at the time it was just a secluded construction area, would stumble across something gruesome. The boyfriend would actually think that what he was looking at was a mannequin, but he realized it was a woman's body and got a hold of police immediately. Which is very common. I feel like I hear a lot of stories where they think they're looking at a mannequin and it's never a mannequin. People are just
I feel like
tossing them out.
it's just a disbelief of finding a dead body. I don't
Right,
think
like
anyone
your
would ever
brain.
think they'd just come across that,
Your brain's probably just trying to come up with something besides, seeing that, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So police, they arrived to the area where they found the body of Shirley Ellis. Immediately, it was obvious that whatever had happened to Shirley had been incredibly violent. She was still wearing a pair of aqua blue pants, but other than that, she had no other clothes on. She was also left staged with her legs spread wide open. They found black duct tape tangled in her hair, which we assume was used to cover her mouth at one point, and it just ended up in her hair somehow. There were also injuries around her wrists and ankles, which indicate she had likely been restrained at some point. Around her neck, it was clear there had been some type of ligature there, and it was also clear that Shirley had suffered extensive trauma to her head, which we later find out was done by a hammer. In fact, the medical examiner would find numerous wounds to her skull that were consistent with her being struck repeatedly with an object. There were also pattern injuries all over her body that suggested she had been deliberately tortured before she died, and the medical examiner would also determine this was all done with various work tools. Ultimately, her cause of death would be determined to be a combination of ligature strangulation, followed by blunt force trauma to her head. So it looks like she was tortured, strangled, and then beat with the hammer in the head.
All with Home Depot tools.
All with some sort of work, yeah, basically. Some sort of work tools. Why do you gotta go for Home Depot, though? I know you're a Lowe's man.
No.
Was that a shot for him? So whoever had done this, like I said, they restrained her, tortured her, killed her before they'd left her body in an isolated industrial area and drove away. So police had to figure out who Shirley had encountered between leaving Wilmington Hospital and ending up where she did. Did someone stop her that night to give her a ride? What kind of vehicle had she gotten into? Had she known the person behind the wheel, or had Shirley simply accepted a ride from the wrong stranger? Kathleen Jennings, who would serve as a state prosecutor in the case later, would say, quote, "There was no reason for Shirley Ellis to be killed, no angry boyfriend or anything that would connect a murderer to her death," end quote.
Just a random act of evil.
Mm-hmm, exactly.
I was going to say, I'm sure this wasn't her first time, like, catching a ride, right?
It usually isn't. I feel like it usually isn't, honestly.
You know, and after doing it so many times, you just kind of...
Get comfy.
Yeah, in a way.
Yeah, you say. Are you trying to
or
say
maybe
like,
you're
how
like
scary
just
it is?
familiar with the area and it's like, oh, it's mostly good people, you know
Yeah,
what I mean?
I know most of the people around here, yada yada.
Then you just have one bad encounter with like an
That's
evil
all it
person.
takes. At this point, police didn't have another body to compare hers to. They didn't have a string of murders stretching along Route 40. And sadly, is one of those cases where in order to get more evidence or anything to point them in the right direction, they'd need another victim. And unfortunately, it would take several more women being found under eerily similar circumstances before investigators began to realize that Shirley Ellis's murder might not have been an isolated crime at all.
I'm guessing there's going to be like similarities between all the murders.
Yes. So for the next 7 months, Shirley Ellis's murder remained unsolved. Then came June 28th, 1988. Catherine DeMauro was a 31-year-old divorcee. I don't know why I said divorce. Like Shirley, Catherine had a history of prostitution arrest. Although it isn't known whether she was actually working or not the night she disappeared, we know she was out there. At around 11:30 p.m., Catherine was seen walking along Route 40, and that would be the last time she was ever seen alive. Less than 7 hours later, at approximately 6:27 a.m., construction workers arriving on site at the new job location in Newark, where they were building the new Fox Run Apartments, was literally, right down the road from our apartment on Route 4. That's where she lived. I don't want to say her name on here because, you know, names.
Yeah.
My old employee lived there.
It was about, what, like 5-10 minutes away from it?
Not that far at all, yeah. Right down the highway.
More so 5, yeah.
Yeah. Officers arrived at the construction site, and it didn't take long for them to find Catherine's body on the job site, which, you're a bricklayer. Imagine walking on the job site and finding a dead woman's body, or
Why
anyone.
would you dump a body at a job site?
I feel like
that's
he
just-
wanted to be found. He wanted her to be found. So, obviously, they called law enforcement right away, and officers arrived at the construction site and discovered the naked body of a woman laying dead. And as I'm sure we all assume, it was Catherine. Her wrists and ankles had been bound. Black duct tape again covered her mouth. And almost immediately, investigators were looking at details that felt disturbingly familiar to Shirley's killing. Catherine was also restrained. She was tortured, strangled with a ligature, and then she suffered blunt force injuries consistent with being struck with a hammer after. So literally the same as the first girl. The only difference, unlike Shirley, who was found with just her pants on, Catherine was found completely naked, no clothes whatsoever. And again, investigators found no evidence that she had been sexually assaulted, but there was something new that they did find on Catherine's body. She had thousands and thousands of these tiny blue fibers all over her. Detectives knew the tiny blue fibers could help connect the victims to the place where police believed those women were being taken, tortured, and ultimately murdered before their bodies were dumped somewhere else. But right now, they had 2 murdered women connected to Route 40 area. Newcastle County Police Captain James Hedrick, who would eventually join the investigation, later recalled, quote, "Everything was consistent with Shirley Ellis's case. We felt that the same person was responsible for both murders," end quote. So now police, they could no longer comfortably treat Shirley's murder as an isolated crime. They had someone out there who had done this before, and as we true crime junkies already know, along with the detectives, there was absolutely no reason to believe he wouldn't do it again. About a week after Catherine's body was discovered, authorities formed a joint task force involving the Delaware State Police and the Newcastle County Police. According to later accounts, roughly 60 people would become involved in this task force, operating out of their own headquarters near the Newcastle County Airport.
Oh, shit.
Investigators reportedly had access to rental vehicles, helicopters, and even an airplane at the airport. Police Captain Hedrick would later describe just how many resources were being thrown at the investigation. He would say, money wasn't an issue, and I don't know anyone who has ever worked for a government agency where money wasn't an issue. We had an unlimited budget. Which honestly, good on them, because I feel like a lot of police agencies don't really work fast enough at catching serial killers, you know?
Dude, isn't there a case you talked about where they said they didn't have the budget?
Episode 2, Judy Rawlings.
And the police were saying, hey,
case.
we didn't have, like, the money to do, like, DNA testing or some shit.
Yeah, exactly. No, you're right. Yeah, that was my
And
second episode.
This is back in 1980...
This is 88, 87?
88,
Yeah.
and they're saying we got unlimited resources. We can get planes, helicopters,
Yeah.
rentals. Like,
They said take it all. Yeah,
It's just different.
helicopters, airplanes, everything you might need.
right.
FBI profilers would later say they were dealing with a sadistic person who didn't need sexual penetration. The torture itself was the gratification. Then, the blue fibers they sent away came back, and the team confirmed those thousands of fibers belonged to a car's interior. So now detectives knew they were looking for a vehicle with distinctive blue carpeting. Unfortunately, forming the task force didn't mean the killings would end, because just a little over a month after Catherine was found, another woman disappeared. So now he's starting to ramp up.
Yeah.
It was like one killing, 7 months, another killing, and now a little over a month, another one. Her name was Margaret Lynn Finner. Margaret was born August 25th, 1961, in Wilmington, Delaware. So at the time she goes missing, she was only 26 years old. In fact, Margaret was just 3 days away from her 27th birthday. On August 22nd, 1988, Margaret was reportedly walking along Route 13 near its connection with Route 40. Sometime that night, witnesses saw Margaret getting into a vehicle before leaving and never being seen again. But this time, police actually would get a description of the car to go on. Witnesses would describe this car as a blue Ford panel van with round headlights. So we know we're looking for a blue Ford van. And behind the wheel was reportedly a white male, but that's all the details detectives would receive at the time. And it was very like, I heard from this person, you know, so it wasn't like an eyewitness account. According to them, Margaret climbed inside that blue van and then she disappeared. Unlike Shirley Ellis and Catherine DeMauro, police didn't have Margaret's body to examine, and she actually wouldn't be found until much later. Just remember her name because she'll come up later in the trials. Now, immediately, the van stood out to detectives. Because remember what investigators had just found out, the blue carpet fibers. So we're looking for a blue van with blue interior carpeting at this point. They wanted to figure out who was driving that van, and that is where Newcastle County police officer and official badass Renee Tashner comes into our story. She plays a huge part. And if you've heard this story before, you know exactly who she is. Renee was fresh out of the police academy. This was actually the first big case of her career. She was one of the female officers assigned to work undercover as a sex worker on Route 40 during the investigation to help catch the killer. And obviously her job was incredibly risky. She would pose as a sex worker and walk the same roads where these women had been disappearing, just up and down Route 40 day after day, hoping the man police were looking for would eventually approach her. And apparently there was no shortage of men stopping. Captain Hedrick would later recall, we had a gamut of people stop for her. Doctors, lawyers, school teachers. At one point, there was a line of 5 or 6 vehicles of men just lined up waiting to talk to her.
Thinking she's a prostitute, right? Which
Yeah.
is all illegal, but they're like, no, not you. We're not looking for you.
Yeah, they don't care. Yep.
Like, they keep thinking like all
Yes.
these fucking creeps, man. Thank God we're not trying to fucking look for you guys. We're looking
Yeah.
for a killer.
They're trying to find the bigger evil at that
Yeah.
point, you know?
Like,
it's
not
like,
you.
oh,
Get the fuck
yeah.
out of here.
Mhm. Now, on September 14th, 1988, less than a month after Margaret disappeared, something different happened. Officer Renee, she was walking along Route 40 undercover when she noticed a vehicle. A blue Ford panel van with round headlights. It drove past her once, twice, then a third time. According to Renee, over a course of approximately 20 minutes, the same van drove past her at least 7 times. Whoever was behind that wheel was clearly watching her. So badass Renee did something incredibly gutsy. She began walking around. She found a more secluded, dark area. She was kind of like trying to lure him there. You know what I mean?
So it made him feel safe enough to make contact and try and snatch her up.
And of course, the blue van followed her. Eventually it stopped, the side door opened, and inside was a white male. She didn't know whether this was the same blue van witnesses had reportedly seen Margaret Finner get into, and she was about to get close enough to that van to give investigators the break they'd been waiting for. As Renee Tashner stood beside that blue Ford van, something immediately caught her attention: the blue carpet lining the inside of the van. Now remember, Catherine's body had been covered in those tiny blue fibers, thousands of them. So Renee, she also noticed something about the man driving the vehicle. He wasn't behaving like the other men who had stopped to talk to her. She would later say, quote, "He was different than any other person who had stopped for me. It was hard to get into a conversation with him. He wasn't in the moment. He was looking right through me," end quote. She would describe his eyes as reminding her of shark's eyes. Just black and hollow, peering like right through you. Like there's nothing there but evil. Now, Officer Renee, she knew police were looking for a van matching this exact description, and she knew the blue carpeting inside could potentially be important to the case. So while she was talking to him, she made sure to not get in his van. So the door's just open, she's chatting with him. She reportedly leaned into the van, she's like kind of flirting with him, talking, and she would just casually run her fingers along the carpet, so it doesn't seem off, right? But she wasn't just touching the carpet as she talked to him, she was pulling the fibers from it to collect. Renee now had a sample they could compare to the blue fibers recovered from Catherine's body. Now the driver, obviously, he just wanted her to get inside the van, but she refused. She ended up making up an excuse, telling him she had been partying all day and was tired, and she actually wanted to just go home and get some sleep.
So he doesn't seem very, like he's just relying on the fact that these women get in the van. I'm sure he like locks it so they can't get out. But he, as far as me right now, he doesn't seem like the type to get out and try and like
Yank him off
get
the
into an
streets.
altercation right now and yank him, push him in a van, probably beat him up.
And
he's like, "Come on, get inside if you want to, you know."
Yeah, and I'm going to bring up a picture of him right now to show you. He's a big dude. He's scary.
He probably saw that as being like too risky to step out, and then she's screaming and he's trying to force her, you know what I mean?
Especially if it's busy or like a street where there's a lot of sex workers or just cars. So I can't find his exact height, but you see him compared to the cops right here in this picture. He's a pretty big dude.
Oh, yeah.
He's pretty big.
He looks at least 6 foot. And husky.
He reminds me of my dad, honestly. So eventually she made that excuse and left. Now, some sources say that something about the interaction made him a little suspicious and he like drove away very quickly. Like something about it just threw him off. But it was a little too late. And while Renee had been talking to him collecting those fibers, investigators had actually been running his license plate. And for the first time, police had a name, and that name was Steven Shithead Pennell. Just kidding.
You got me for a second. I was like, no way, that's his middle name.
His middle name's Brian, but fuck him.
His
Steven Pennell. Now, a little about Pennell, and this is pretty much just what they could find about him. He was a Delaware electrician, so imagine the serial killers just in and out of people's houses or job sites, these construction sites. He had no criminal record whatsoever, so there was really not much to go on, honestly. But this seemingly ordinary man was someone investigators wanted to know a whole more about. The carpet fibers Renee collected were sent away for testing, and investigators began focusing their attention on Steven Pennell. And there was a huge problem. Having a suspicious van and carpet fibers wasn't enough evidence, obviously, to arrest someone for murder. Remember, testing does take a while for, honestly, any testing of any sort takes forever. But they knew while they waited for the results, they just had to dig a little deeper, see if they could find anything else. And one thing was clear. While they continued investigating Pennell, the women working or simply walking along Route 40 were still in danger. And only 2 days after undercover officer Renee encountered the blue van, another woman disappeared. September 18th, 1988. Michelle Gordon, who was just 22 years old at the time, was living in Newcastle County. She was reportedly last seen walking along Route 40, getting to the passenger side of a blue Ford panel van. But this time, there was something investigators hadn't had before. a full-fledged eyewitness. Now, before someone, the van was kind of getting mentioned around, but it wasn't an eyewitness. It wasn't reliable. It's more of, I heard from a friend of a friend. But this time, they had their first eyewitness. And according to the accounts of the investigation, the witness knew Michelle. She was actually friends with Michelle. So she's like, yeah, I saw her. I saw her get into this blue van. And I saw her get in there with this local electrician I know named Steven Pennell. So now they're seeing the van. She's watching her friend get in. And she even knows who Pennell is. There's something very different about Michelle's death. According to accounts of the case, Michelle, she did have cocaine in her system at the time she was abducted and tortured. And the medical examiner would later testify that Michelle's heart was unable to withstand the tremendous physical stress being placed on her body because she was tortured. So she would actually die during the torture due to her heart giving out like a heart attack.
No shit.
Now, just 3 days after this disappearance, so we're getting back to back now. We're days apart. Just 3 days after Michelle disappeared, again, she's not declared dead, they haven't found a body, she's still a missing person, another woman vanished from Route 40. So his killings, they're ramping up. It hasn't even been a full 72-hour cool-down period before he grabbed another woman. And this woman's name was Kathleen Myers. Kathleen was 26 years old, and she lived in Brookmont Farms area.
Wait, you said Brookmont Farms?
Yeah.
Oh, that's even closer to where we used to live.
Where is it? Sounds
Brookmont
familiar.
Farms is now called Sparrow Run. Remember I told you? It's called Sparrow Run now.
Oh.
But it was such like a bad neighborhood. They tried to put more houses and shit in there and rename the neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
So more people could move in.
They do this like a little later in the story where Steven Pennell lived.
He lived in there?
No, he didn't live in there. This girl does, his like last victim. But where he lived, we're going to go over and you're going to be like, holy shit. It'll blow your mind. So Kathleen, she was hitchhiking along Route 40 when an off-duty police officer saw her accepting a ride. So now a cop is witnessing this. Once again, from a blue Ford van. Luckily, this officer, he was aware and on the lookout for a blue van, so he wrote down the license plate when he saw this going on.
Yeah, they already know.
It came back to Steven Shitface Pennell. At this point in the investigation, Pennell's name wasn't just appearing once. It wasn't some random coincidence. It was happening over and over again. His van was now repeatedly intersecting with the exact investigation police were desperately trying to solve. But police still needed more evidence to prove what they already suspected was happening inside that blue van.
I'm sure this was their main suspect. They're like,
100%.
we're so close. We just need something else.
Yeah. At this point, 31-year-old Steven Pennell had the full attention of the task force. Investigators began monitoring his movements, following him, and trying to gather enough evidence to finally get inside that van. And they were watching him so closely that Officer Renee Tashner, again, the girl who was undercover as a sex worker, found herself sitting near Pennell during a surveillance at a Moody Blues concert one evening. While she was there, something happened that really stuck with her. I saw her bring this up in a couple interviews. Pennell's daughter, because Steven Pennell is married with two kids.
What?
Approached.
Wow, you kept that fact away from me.
Yep. Earlier I was like, oh wait, no, don't spill the beans.
Because the whole time I'm thinking like single guy, like some just weirdo.
No,
with a van.
nope.
Man.
So Pennell's daughter, he actually has two kids. Pennell's daughter would approach Officer Renee while she's undercover working at this concert, just keeping an eye on him. And she was just trying to collect money for a school fundraiser. So she went up to this undercover cop and was like, you want to donate to my school? Just being a kid. And later Officer Renee would remember she was just a kid and you never want any child to experience what was happening. I just think it's one of those little moments in this case that reminds you of just how many lives were about to be completely destroyed by what he had done. Investigators desperately wanted inside that blue van, and eventually, Delaware Attorney General Charles Oberle approved a search warrant to do just that. And the way police executed this search warrant was pretty clever, in my opinion. Pennell had previously been stopped for a traffic violation and was scheduled to appear in court to take care of his ticket, right? So Pennell, he went to court to take care of this ticket, and police used this opportunity to legally keep him occupied in the courthouse while investigators began to search his vehicle. But once they got inside that van, they found more than they could have hoped for, which, I mean, they're just looking for any piece of evidence, but they found so much more. Investigators collected carpet fibers that could be compared to the fibers recovered from the victims as well. They recovered hair and blood evidence, so they found DNA. They found duct tape consistent with the type investigators had been encountering during the murder investigations, the tape we talked about on multiple bodies. And then they found something even more disturbing. Inside Pennell's van were various tools and restraints. Accounts of the investigation had described the collection as Pennell's torture kit. And this torture kit would include pliers, restraints, knives, needles, flex cuffs, handcuffs, whips, rolls of duct tape, just anything you can imagine in an electrician's van. Needless to say, at this point, detectives finally had enough. They had the blue carpeting that came back as a match once all the testing was done. They had biological evidence now. They had the duct tape, the tools, the restraints, and I mean, you can't fight hair and blood DNA.
Mm-hmm.
They had multiple witnesses now also who would testify, connecting the same type of vehicle to women who disappeared along Route 40, including one of their own officers who interacted with him. So the walls, they're closing in around Steven Pennell. But investigators still had another development coming. Do you remember Margaret Finner? I said to remember her name earlier in the episode. Margaret, just a reminder, she disappeared. Her body wasn't found, but an eyewitness reportedly saw her entering the blue Ford panel van. At this point, she'd been missing for about 3 months. It's November 1988, and Margaret's remains were finally discovered near the Chesapeake and Delaware Canal.
What? Oh, shit.
Is that where we've been, like, biking or longboarding?
Yeah, that's the canal.
Yeah,
Right
that's
up
what I
there,
thought. I was like, oh, I think that's where we've gone a few times. At this point, she'd been out there for 3 months. Her body had been exposed to the elements for so long that investigators were unable to determine the cause of death. She was also so decomposed that she had to be identified by her dental records, so as you can assume, there wasn't much evidence on her. Although authorities suspected Margaret belonged to the same string of murders Steven committed, they ultimately didn't have enough evidence to charge Pennell with killing her, so her death is still unsolved to this day. But we can assume who did it. Then came the day everyone waited for. November 29th, 1988, which is exactly 1 year after Shirley Ellis, his first victim's body, was found, an arrest warrant was issued for Steven Brian Pennell. Steven was arrested and charged with the murders of Shirley Ellis, Catherine DeMauro, and Michelle Gordon. Police went to his home located in the Glasgow Trailer Park, which I believe is now called Glasgow Pines. And to this day...
I grew up in that neighborhood.
Huh?
I said I grew up in that neighborhood, so...
To this day, the Pennell family still lives there, in that trailer park.
Oh, that's crazy.
So Steven would be charged for 3 counts of murder, and after a year of women disappearing and bodies being discovered along Delaware's highways and waterways, police finally had the man they believed was responsible. But if investigators expected Pennell to sit down and explain what had happened to these women, it wasn't going to happen. Faced with the evidence against him, Steven Pennell exercised his right to remain silent. Despite everything police found, he denied killing any of the women. Now, a little bit about the monster that is Steven Pennell, and I say a little because that's really all we have. Captain James Hedrick would describe Pennell as your typical all-American person. He was married, father of 2, worked as an electrician, and had surprisingly no criminal record. If you looked at his life before the investigation, there wasn't anything that immediately would scream serial killer. Even his upbringing seemed normal. You hear the stories here on our show, but there are some things we just can't show you on the main feed. That's where the Inner Circle comes in. The Inner Circle is our private Patreon community with 3 different tiers depending on how deep you want to go. Members can get access to real crime scene photos and case material that I don't release anywhere else, plus up to 2 bonus episodes every single month depending on what tier you choose. All tiers automatically get early access to new episodes before everyone else and listen completely ad-free. So there's no interruptions, just the case from beginning to end. When you join, you'll also get access to our private Discord community where we can talk about the cases, share theories, discuss upcoming episodes, and yes, I'm actually in there too, so you can come hang out and chat with me. With 3 different tiers to choose from, you can decide just how far into the Inner Circle you want to go. The podcast tells the stories, but Patreon takes you even deeper inside the cases. Join our Patreon with the link in our show notes because some things are better kept inside the circle. Now, let's get back to our episode. Before the trial started, Pennell's attorney tried to get those blue carpet fibers thrown out as evidence. He was trying to get them thrown out of court. Remember, Officer Renee Tashner had pulled those blue fibers from the van? Those were the ones that his attorney was trying to get thrown out of court. His attorney would argue that she didn't have the right to take them without a warrant, but the judge disagreed. Pennell had opened the van door himself, exposing the carpet to Renee, so no warrant was needed and the fibers were allowed into evidence. And this was a huge win for prosecutors, because those fibers were what originally helped lead police to Steven Pennell's van, and to all the other evidence inside the van. So they were worried if those fibers were thrown out, so would all the other evidence they found after. It'd be viewed as inadmissible in court. It'd actually be considered the fruit of the poisonous tree law. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
It's very interesting. Fruit of the poisonous tree. If you don't know what this is, the fruit of the poisonous tree law, it's basically a doctrine that bars evidence in court if it's discovered as a result of initial illegal.
So once the illegal evidence is obtained, anything therefore after is also illegal and can be thrown out.
So you get evidence illegally, unconstitutional searches and seizures.
So it's like when police do an illegal search warrant
and find
it goes to court, whatever, and they do find something, whatever. They'll say because the search warrant was illegal, and although you did find evidence that proves whoever you're going after guilty, it gets thrown out because they did the search warrant illegally.
Yeah, fruit of the poisonous tree. Isn't that
I never heard that term.
Yeah,
that's an interesting.
It's very interesting. It makes sense though.
for it.
Fruit of the poisonous tree. I see completely why they were probably like, fuck, if they don't take these fibers, we lose everything. We use these fibers to get the search warrant to go in his van.
Right.
Torture weapons, all that would be gone. Everything would literally be gone. But don't forget, they also had DNA evidence from the van. So blue fibers get thrown out, so would the DNA that matched, and the blood as well that matched a few of his victims. Now, big reminder, this was 1989, so DNA evidence in criminal trials was extremely new back then. This is actually also the first time DNA profiling was used in a Delaware criminal case.
Okay.
Now, even the judge, he admitted there was a learning curve because there wasn't many previous cases that looked back on regarding DNA, and he just wanted to make sure everyone understood the basics of DNA, what it was, how it worked, and how it could be used as evidence. For some reason, Pennell's attorney made a very risky decision and let Steven Pennell on the stand to defend himself. Pennell now had to explain how evidence from these women ended up inside his van. When asked about Catherine, Pennell admitted he'd picked her up for sex. He claimed he paid her $25 for oral sex and then dropped her off. He even joked that Catherine gave him $10 back. And apparently his attitude while talking about Catherine did him absolutely no favors. His own attorney would later say, where he got slaughtered was his demeanor. Like,
mind you, all while his wife is probably listening to this too.
Yeah. So his attorney said he got slaughtered by going on the stand. And again, I'm sure his attorney was probably like, man, hey, don't do this, and he still took the stand, which happens a lot. Now, the prosecutor, Kathleen Jennings, she would completely agree. She remembered how cold Pennell talked about Catherine on that stand, saying, quote, he talked about her like she was some piece of garbage he could just throw away, end quote. And even with the fibers, DNA evidence, and Pennell's own testimony, the jury struggled. They deliberated for 8 days.
Oh, wow.
His attorney actually started becoming hopeful because he expected a conviction within the first couple of days, if not hours. So this was going over a week now. But on Thanksgiving Day, 1989, in my opinion, I think they were like, I want to go home, man. It's Thanksgiving. Like, let's figure this out.
Oh, yeah.
The jury finally came back with their decision. Sadly, when it comes to Michelle Gordon's murder, the jury, they said they couldn't reach an agreement because they all couldn't say if her cause of death was a complication to cocaine or Steven.
It's an interesting point.
Yeah.
But it's not disregarding the fact that she was picked up by Steven. Based on the other evidence of what he did to other women, that he would potentially do this to her, like kill her.
My opinion is, could it have been just the drugs? Sure. People take drugs, they die daily in this country, we see it all over the news. But two things. One, the medical examiner even said the torture really pushed her body to the breaking point. If she wasn't under that stress, maybe she would have lived, cocaine in her system or not. And two, again, with or without cocaine in her system, either way, Steven Pennell kidnapped and started to torture her, with the end result being her death. I think he should 1,000% be charged with her murder. She wouldn't even be in that situation if it wasn't for him. Now, another thing they couldn't agree on was whether Pennell should receive the death penalty or not if he was convicted. In the end, Pennell would be sentenced with 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole, but prosecutors weren't finished with him yet. They were now preparing to take Pennell back to court for the murders of the other women. They were trying to take him back to court to charge him with the murders of the 2 other women, and this is pretty much when they were like, oh, there's not enough evidence. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Now, before trial could happen, Pennell did something pretty unexpected. He fired both his attorneys and did what I think all serial killers should do, represent themselves in court. He did a plea to no contest to both murders. Pleading no contest, it isn't technically the same thing as standing up and saying, I did it. In fact, Pennell, to his death, would never actually admit that he murdered any woman or did anything to them. But by him saying this, he is accepting his conviction without fighting any of the charges, and this time Pennell was sentenced to death. Normally, you would expect someone facing execution to immediately begin fighting that sentence, but Pennell did the opposite. He wanted to die. Delaware automatically reviewed death penalty cases, and when Pennell's case reached the Delaware Supreme Court, he personally argued that his death sentence should stand. So most people who go and fight it, he's like, nope, I should die. He even pointed to the repeated circumstances of the murders, telling the justices, one could hardly say the death penalty is disproportionate. It's just such a strange thing to hear coming from a man who still wouldn't admit that he committed the murders,
but agreed that he should die.
Exactly. Now, at this point, there was actually 6 other men sitting on Delaware's death row, but they were all fighting their sentences. Pennell wasn't, and because he refused to fight his sentences, he was moved to the front of the line. Before his death, Pennell would cite the Bible. He framed his execution as God's law and state law aligning. He claimed he wanted to spare his family years of appeals, and that's why he wanted to get put to death. It wasn't because he was guilty. It wasn't because he deserved it. He just wanted to save his family. So on October 31st, 1991, Steven Pennell was sentenced to death. A psych eval before his death described him as a pleasant and friendly man, having no psychosis, no depression, no paranoia, and for whatever reason it also used the word attractive. In his little description, it just said attractive.
Who wrote this shit?
I don't get the point of that. I don't really get the point of that at all, but okay. The prosecutor for Steven's case was a woman named Kathleen Jennings, who we spoke of before. She would actually receive flowers after Steven Pennell was convicted, and a card that read, quote, "You made us feel human again," from the woman on Route 40, end quote. On March 14th, 1992, Steven Brian Pennell showed no emotions, no remorse, no sadness, nothing as he laid back on the execution table. Instead of sympathy, he told everyone how he refused his last meal since 33 babies had been aborted that year. He then went on to say how those 33 babies died for no reason, while he was dying for a deed he deserved death for. He was glad Christ forgave him, and that those babies didn't get a first meal, so he wouldn't get a last meal in their memory. How fucking honorable of him. Obviously sarcasm. He was executed at James T. Vaughn Correctional Center, aka Smyrna Prison. That's where he was executed. I wish they would have fried him, but he died by lethal injection. And another fun fact, well, morbid fun fact, he would actually be the first person in Delaware put to death in almost 50 years.
Wow.
46 to be exact. This case forced Delaware to professionalize its homicide investigations, and it also established DNA precedents still used to this day. This case is a big reminder to remember not everyone is as they seem, and to also always remember the names behind the headlines. I'm Gabby D.
And this is Ty.
And I'll see you next time. Beyond the Bone Saw. Before we jump back into the action, that's dubby.gg, and use code BONESAW at checkout, BONESAW, for 10% off your entire order. All the info is in the show notes. Huge thanks to Dubby for believing in the pod, and a huge shout out to you guys for listening. Now, let's get back to it.